We're here at the IDTechEx Show right here, and you just had a keynote. So who are you?
So I'm Richard Kirk, Chief Executive of PolyPhotonix's, and I've just been talking about a treatment for diabetic retinopathy which developed a few years ago. So I've just been sharing our findings, telling everybody about it.
The 1,000 people in here, and I'll post the whole keynote, the video. So right here, it looks like a mask, and it looks like really exciting because there's a lot of people affected by.
That's right.
Diabetic retinopathy, or what's it called?
Well, diabetic retinopathy is a disease that's a consequence of diabetes, and it almost 2/3 of people with type 2 diabetes will go on and develop some form of diabetic retinopathy, and ultimately it makes you go blind.
How many people is that?
Well, it depends on the figures, but we're looking at in excess of 400 million people worldwide with diabetes. So a fair portion of those have this disease.
So perhaps 300 million or more than 200 million people.
With the disease, well over 100 million people with the disease, but with many more with background conditions, and lots more undiagnosed as well.
So 100 million people are going blind because of diabetes.
Yes.
Right now.
Yes.
And you have a solution.
Yes.
I mean, there's another thing they're doing. They're doing this painful thing where they're getting injections, right?
Well, there's two types of standard injection, and one is it's literally an injection into the eye, and that's an intraocular injection. It's a drug, which is a suppressant of neovascular growth at the back of the eye. It's a VEGF suppressant, but it's as painful as it sounds. I mean, it's an injection into the eye repeatedly.
While your eye is sleeping, right? You don't see the needle come in.
You do. No, they clamp the eye. They hold it open, and they inject into the eye. You see everything. It's really bad. Yeah, it's awful.
But you have a solution where, and is it even better, your solution, than what the injection would do?
Well, we believe so. We've got some clinical trials that show it is, and the beauty of our treatment is it's a mask. It's not dissimilar to a kind of mask that you would wear on an aeroplane, but you wear it at night as you go to sleep, and the mask emits a light into the eye, and as you're asleep, it prevents dark adaptation of the rod. The rod being one of the two photoreceptors. And as we suppress the rod activity, we reduce the oxygen demand at the back of the eye. And that's the principle behind it. So it's very, very simple. You could almost put it on the back of an envelope. And it costs a fraction of the current treatments, which is why payers like the National Health Service or insurance groups are really excited. It could save hundreds of millions in the UK alone.
So it's just a mask? What kind of light is it emitting in your eye? Is it?
So
does it look like you're looking at daylight while you sleep, or no?
No, it's a fairly low level light, and it looks like a green light. But the eye adapts to it very, very quickly. The brain has something called a Troxler effect, which kicks in, and after a few minutes, the brain just decides it's not interesting and chooses to ignore it. But anyway, it's a light that the cone doesn't see. Now, our cone photoreceptor is what we use in daytime and for all our central vision. So talking to you now, I'm using my cone, I'm looking directly at you. If we were activating the cone at night, then it would be almost impossible to sleep. So the beauty of the mask is it only affects the rod, and we just don't see it. So it's really very, very simple.
It doesn't. Does it change your sleeping patterns, or do you you dream in green now, or what happens for
exactly.
people that wear it?
No, it doesn't, because what we've, as part of the clinical trials and the regulatory approvals, we have to demonstrate that it doesn't change sleeping patterns, it doesn't change the electrophysiology at the back of the eye, and all of these things. So we have to test it on healthy people as well, and the evidence shows that it doesn't affect sleeping at all. In fact, to some degree, we would say it improves it. And that's partly because people who use this mask have a number of complications from the disease of diabetes. And the eye disease is just one of a number of complications. So they have interrupted sleeping anyway. But we find that they start to change their habit. If you start to do something regularly, as simple as putting a mask on every night, and then looking at how often you use that mask, then it builds it forms a habit. And what we see is long-term users actually report improved sleeping patterns.
So potentially you could have like sleep sensors in there. You could like show a graph of how good your sleep was.
So
That's
it's-
another side thing.
Yeah,
to
it's a
have in
really
the
good
electronics, right?
point. So eventually we can have sleep sensors in there. We can record the type of sleep you're having, the quality of the sleep, and it could be linked to all these other things. So yeah, you're completely right. This is just the first part of a what could be a very comprehensive tool to analyze lifestyle and sleeping.
And in your presentation, you said it's all about oxygen. So
Yeah.
your solution.
It's almost an oxygen mask. So oxygen is the driver. It's the hypoxia that happens in the retina at night, and it happens to healthy people. It's just that hypoxia, as the rod starts to demand more oxygen, it's the hypoxia that drives neovascularization. And when you're diabetic, the neovascularization is compromised, and you end up in this vicious circle of oxygen starvation, neovascularization, compromised neovascularization, and then you start to develop aneurysms and bleeding.
So the light can trigger the oxygenation.
So what the light does is suppress the oxygen demand in the patient at night.
Suppress
And
it.
suppresses it because it prevents the dark adaptation of the rod. So it's remarkably simple.
It's triggering immune systems, right?
No,
Is
no,
it
no.
nothing
It's
to do with
no,
immune?
no, no. It's
Like
simply
natural things that are triggered.
Yeah, it's simply suppressing the dark adaptation of the rod. Very simple.
Is it an LED type of light? Or?
This particular version of the mask is an OLED, an organic light emitting diode, which is where we come from.
Nice. Is that the best kind of light? Is like more natural light than LED?
Well,
Does that change anything?
No, that doesn't really matter. The light that we're putting into the eye is within the visible spectrum anyway. Although we've had to do lots of tests about its wider implications of illuminating the eye at night, and we've done lots of safety tests around that. But the source of the light doesn't matter so much as the wavelength and what type of light it is.
So a wavelength. You have a specific.
It's a very narrow wavelength, a very specific wavelength.
The one it just emits that one exactly.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's the one that's
It's
needed.
very narrow.
You don't need any other wavelengths.
So what other wavelengths would start to activate other parts or other photoreceptors, and they would, if anything, activate the photoreceptors, and that's what we don't want to do. We want to suppress them.
This is really important and revolutionizing. In your presentation, you were talking about one lady that, for example, got improved vision out of that.
That's
How's
right.
that possible?
Isabel. It doesn't happen with everybody, but sometimes patients can see a fairly quick improvement, in as little as 3 to 4 months. And in some patients who have worn glasses for a long time, we're changing the shape at the back of the eye to some degree, and we're reducing the edema. And Isabel was a long-term patient. She'd worn the mask for about 12 months, but she'd also worn glasses all her life. And we changed the shape of the back of the eye so much that she needed a new prescription. So Isabel was quite unusual. That doesn't happen to a lot of people. But what we're looking for is a reduction in the size of the cyst, but also a parallel improvement in visual acuity. The two go together.
And so, of course, it's amazing to save sight. People can keep seeing that. That's a huge value.
Yes.
But right now, if you get the injection, if people get injections, it costs £6,000 per year.
At least
Per eye or
per eye.
Per
Yes.
eye.
Yes.
£6,000 per eye per year.
Yes.
And your
that
solution
cost
is definitely cheaper.
Oh, it's a fraction of the cost. The NHS, estimate that on adoption of this, they could save at least 300 million a year in the UK alone. So if you look at that across the world, the savings are colossal.
So that's why you're working with NHS, right?
NHS is a key partner. They're one of our largest research partners, one of our largest funders as well. They've been funding a number of clinical trials. But we're also working in a number of other countries, in particular in Brazil. We're working in the US. We're working in the Middle East and in France. So we're starting to spread our wings and move abroad.
When you have this slide where you have all these different countries and you say the United Kingdom is in the bottom right, and
Oh,
Denmark
yes.
is near over there. Is it does it have to do with the regulations and stuff?
It does. I mean, the indices on this graph are very interesting. It's to do with the ease of doing business, the levels of corruption, etc., of which, you know, Denmark and the United Kingdom score very highly on.
Highly?
Well, in terms of very low levels of corruption, very
okay, so
low.
okay.
But the countermeasure to that is the fact that there are a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of regulation. It's actually very difficult to get very simple things done, and that's one of the problems, and that's why the UK scores so low on that.
How long have you been having this solution going on?
So we developed, we started our trials, our own trials in 2011. We knew fairly quickly that the mask worked, but we had to develop the efficacy. We had to develop the proof. We were able, in so much as we had regulatory approval about 3 years ago, and so we've been battling levels of bureaucracy and you know, the inability for institutions to adopt for the last 3 years.
But so you're talking about 7 years of trying to get it.
Well, the first few years were developing the science and getting it through its trials, but the last 2 or 3 years have been just trying to get it adopted. And you know, and you have to look at incentives. You know, why a motivation? Why are certain institutions prevented from acting quickly on innovation? You know, and there's a number of very complex reasons for that.
But people are going blind, so you have to hurry up.
The
And
frustrating
get it out there,
thing
right?
is, while governments and institutions hesitate, people are going blind. That's really frustrating.
But how many users do you have right now? You have thousands, or what do you have?
Yes, within clinical trials, we have hundreds within clinical trials and a few thousand within private patients. We have over 1 million hours of recorded patient use. But also, importantly, within those 1 million hours, we don't have a single serious adverse event reported.
No adverse?
No,
So
none
it's
at all.
100% good?
Yes,
For sure?
yeah.
I mean, all these hundreds of users and thousands of users, they are basically all seeing improvements. Or at least
Well, no, I
something.
mean, a majority are seeing improvement. We can't say everybody's seeing improvements. You know, some people are non-responders. Some people have other things going on in their life which mean that, you know, it means the mask isn't as effective as it could be. What we can't do is control diabetes. So, you know, if a patient has a number of serious issues related to their diabetes, that will, you know, affect the mask, the efficacy of the mask. But in the majority of patients who wear the mask who are very compliant, we see very good improvements, very good.
Did you say
and rather quickly.
67%?
The trials have shown it's on average about 67%.
Of the people are getting improvements?
Yes, which contrasts very well with the current other treatments. The other big treatment being the laser treatments, photocoagulation, which destroys the rod photoreceptors. And after a number of laser interventions, you start to lose your peripheral eyesight, and eventually you'll lose your driver's license. You know, you can't see at night. The other intervention is the injection into the eye, which has some problems associated with it, but the biggest immediate one is the cost of that intervention. Healthcare systems just, you know, can't afford it.
But the injection is getting how many % of people improving?
It's on average, well, it depends on which statistics, but you're looking at about a 30% have a very good improvement, 30% see a normalization, stasis of the disease.
But you have definitely better than that improvements.
It depends. You see, diabetic eye disease is a fairly long disease. You have very early stage and you have acute late stage, and it depends at what point are you measuring. So what we've seen in our clinical trials that we have very good efficacy with late stage, but also because it's relatively cheap, we can use it earlier in the disease path, and it can be used as a treatment but also as a prevention, and that's what's quite exciting about the mask. Because it's so cheap, we can use it early.
But the late stage is like the very urgent ones, right? They're going
well.
blind.
I mean, if
you see improvements right there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is huge.
If it's late stage, then you've got some vision impairment. It's bad. You know, to even get to that point where you need intraocular injections is bad.
But you were talking about £1,000 per cost. What's the cost of your solution? Is it
Well,
It's cheaper, definitely, right?
the mask is a fraction of the cost of the other treatments. Now, some of that cost is the clinical cost. So PolyPhotonix's never sells directly to a patient. We only ever work through prescribed. PolyPhotonix's only ever sells. Start again.
Yeah.
PolyPhotonix's never sells directly to a patient. We only ever work through healthcare professionals.
Yeah.
For example, the NHS or a private insurance company, or or directly with an eye hospital or an eye clinic. Some of those costs are borne by, are costs, additional overheads from the clinic, because there's some time you have to spend with patients. So you have a very highly qualified ophthalmologist, clinician, talking to a patient, having regular checkups. What we advise is a 3-monthly checkup. And this is to make sure that the mask is efficacious, it's working, and also to see whether any alternative treatment's required. So 3 months seems to be the regular interval pretty much around the world. Most eye hospitals around the world have regular 3-month interventions. So the mask is designed to integrate with that existing system.
So it will last for 3 months in a battery, or?
Yeah, exactly. So it has an on date and an off date. You decide what that date is.
So 90 days of all night.
Yep.
Battery life.
Yep. And then it turns itself off. So
no need to charge it at home? Or?
No, nothing. And there's an internal clock. So the mask turns on a date that you decide with your physician, and then the mask will turn itself off in 3 months, and you have to go back and get a replacement.
But potentially you could do other versions that people could recharge at home?
Well,
potentially?
Technology is improving all the time. The light emitters are getting more efficient, the batteries are getting more efficient, and as those progress and improve, we will follow suit and improve the device. So eventually you could have a device that lasts longer, but what we recommend is working in conjunction with the eye hospital or eye clinic and the physician. So 3-month regular intervals are recommended. That's for patients with late stage disease. If it's being used as a preventative early stage disease, then you may only go to your physician once a year, and that would be a different scenario.
And OLED lighting seems to be constantly improving. Like at the IDTechEx Show, we're right here.
Yep.
Lots of talk about flexible or printed OLED.
Yes.
Potentially making the mask lighter.
Absolutely. So as the technology is improving, initially we could only really make OLEDs on glass, but now we can make flexible OLEDs. So
you have that working already?
Well, we don't do the OLEDs. We work with an OEM, but they're improving as well. So as all these improvements come through over the next few years, the mask will get thinner, it'll become more flexible, it'll be more conformable, and more intelligent. There's a bunch of stuff we can put in there.
More sensors.
More sensors, more communication, looking at sleeping patterns, accelerator devices. Bluetooth, exactly.
IoT,
all of these things.
Hub and stuff, so it just goes to the cloud, or?
Exactly. That's all pretty much doable now. It's just it's a question of time and money and effort and making these things happen.
Awesome, but I think it's amazing. Thanks a lot for saving people's vision.
Thank you.
I think it's great, and improving their vision even.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
That's really amazing.
Exactly. As I said, it's one of the most common causes of blindness around the world, and stopping that and preventing it and improving vision is very exciting.